Welcome to the video lecture associated with using and defining views. Really the last topic in chapter 6. What happens here, or what we're talking about here, is up until this point we've been writing SQL dynamically. We've been writing in SQL and asking the database to return data sets to answer questions that we had. Views are those SQL statements stored. Okay, so instead of having to type out that SQL over and over and over again, once I've got an SQL statement that answers a certain question, I can save that as a view. It will be saved in my schema or in Microsoft Access. It just gets stored in the database. So all of those SQL statements that we've been entering in, when we go to close the window and it asks us to save, we could have clicked yes and then just given it a name, preferably a well-formed name using some kind of naming convention. But in database management systems like Oracle and SQL Server, when you create views, they get stored in your schema. Just as if you created a table, it would get stored in your schema. So views provide users controlled access to tables. So what I can do is I can only include columns in tables that certain people should see. And I can exclude columns that I don't want users to see. And that's what I mean by controlled access to tables. The base table is the table that the view is based on. So for instance, if we were selecting star from customer T, the base table is customer T. Base tables can also be other views. I can have views based on views, based on views, based on views. That can get fairly complicated. A couple of different kinds of views. We have dynamic views, which are the ones that we have been running. So what they do is they create a virtual table. So as you run a query, remember in Microsoft Access we were running queries. When you run queries, you actually see data returned to you in a grid format as look, for all intents and purposes, is a table. A dynamic view is a virtual table created dynamically upon request by a user. So when you run the view and you get that data set is a virtual table. There's no data that's actually stored. Instead, the data from the base table is made available to the user, and it's actually stored temporarily in RAM memory. So it's based on the SQL select statement. Materialized views, however, are a bit different. Materialized views, otherwise known as in some circles as make table views, will actually copy or replicate data. So when you run the view, it actually pulls the data set and stores it in a base table somewhere else. So data is actually being stored. Usually materialized views are set to refresh themselves periodically, once every hour, once a day, once a week, once a month, something along those lines. So let's take a look at a create table or a create view statement in Oracle. So here we have, we're creating a view, so just like create table and create index, this is create view, expensive stuff _v. So again, the naming convention is _v for views. And the as keyword says that whatever is after this is the SQL statement that this view is based on. Right, so we have as, select a couple of columns from the product T table where the product standard price is greater than $300. The with check option only works for what are known as updatable views. So there are certain views that when you run and you get that virtual table, when you make updates to the data in that virtual table, those updates will actually go back to the base table. Won't spend too much time on that, but just understand. So a view has a name and it's based on a select statement. Let's not worry too much about the check option. So there are certain advantages to views. They simplify the query command. So again, if I have someone else that wrote this huge query, very complicated to get me a data set, I can then run some fairly simple SQL using that query as my base table. It simplifies query commands that way. It assists with data security. So that's I can use that to exclude certain columns from views and then let users use the views that don't have the columns that I don't want them to see. They enhance programming productivity in that once I've got this view, I don't have to rewrite that view over and over and over again. Since it's a view, it will always contain the most current base table data, except if it's a materialized view. So it's dynamic. Every time I run it, I get refreshed data from the base tables. It doesn't use storage space, or the storage space that it does use is literally the characters associated with the SQL statement, which again should be very, very small, or can be very, very small. We can provide customized view for users, and it establishes physical data independence. In other words, I can, I'm not going to get into that, but it gets you independent from physical data. So instead of, that's really a sharing thing when certain databases, especially Microsoft Access, will lock a table so that you can't use it if someone else actually opens up the physical table. If you're using a view, what that does is that makes a virtual table, right? So if I open up a view, it pulls the data from the physical data, which is the base table, so that I can use that in RAM memory. Whereas if I opened up the table direct, and then other users can run views on that same table. If everyone's going back to the base table, people can get locked out, or people can have hesitations before they actually see the data. So that's where we get physical data independence. There are disadvantages. There is processing time each time a view is referenced. So every time I run a view, the processor has to go to the base tables associated with the view and pull the data and bring them into RAM memory. And the other part is they may or may not be directly updatable. So the query might be so complex that I actually can't use it for data manipulation. So some things to keep in mind. And that is the end of my video lecture of using and defining views.